Hi guys, welcome back to the Academy of Historical Fencing. Nick Thomas here. I'm going to be talking about the Black Fencer rapiers today. This is a subject which is a lot of requests to hear about, and the reason for that is because up until this point there has not been any synthetic rapier option available mass market, or really on any market. So yeah, it's the sort of first commercially available synthetic rapier. And the reason that's a big deal is because up until now, rapiers are just difficult to get. There aren't that many suppliers of good rapiers. They usually are quite expensive. Waiting times can be very long as well. I would say overall the biggest problem with rapiers is the cost. Is that most rapiers these days, you're talking £300 upwards. So it can be pretty heavy, which means it's expensive to get into. And that's the number one concern really, is that we haven't had a starter rapier. We used to use the Hamway Practical 43, which has its problems, but it was cheap years ago, and it's not cheap anymore, so it's just not really worth the price. Anyway, back onto Black Fencer. So, first of all, where am I coming from with this? Well, I post loads of sabre stuff, as you know, but I've been a rapier instructor for a lot longer than I've been a sabre instructor. So I teach from Capoferro, so I'm really interested in rapiers around the time of sort of 1600. His manual was published in 1610. And that's, I would say, very much the golden era of rapiers. It's when they were at their longest, sort of most elaborate, if you like. And so that's what I'm interested in. That's sort of the really long period civilian rapiers. Really long length of the period. Yeah, you get the idea. So Black Fencer's come out with the swept hilt, and I've also got the cup hilt down there, so I've got both models to show you today. And I've now had them for at least a few months, used them with lots of sparring. I've handed them out around the club to get plenty of use as well. So I've got a really good idea now of what they're like and what I think of them. So the first thing is how much are they like a rapier, both original and the kind of training sword that you might use today. Well, here's my my favourite rapier for training, which is actually a complete bodge of parts. It's a custom Regeni blade with a mix of other component parts from different companies. But yeah, this is my standard rapier. This is the Black Fencer, and you can tell that overall it gives a good impression of a typical, what we'd call a swept hilt rapier. Well, this is actually a closed port design, but that's just unique to this hilt. But it's just a very, very, very common, probably the most common rapier style you can ever get. It's just what's called this swept hilt design. And it was used right the way through the rapier period. And the other option is the cup hilt, which I'm going to go on to in a bit. I'll talk more about the swept hilt, and the two reasons for that are, one, I prefer it. I mean, I prefer swept hilts, and I prefer the Black Fencer swept hilt. And because I do Capoferro, I'm not particularly interested in cup hilts because they didn't come along until a couple of decades after the manual was published and the period that I'm interested in for rapiers. So cup hilts, fringe interest for me. So I'm going to talk more about this one. Right, weight-wise, it is just under 1 kilo. It's about 980 grams. And that means that for the era of Capoferro, it is light, but only by a bit. Typical Capoferro rapier, if you look at historical examples, will be around about 1.2 to 1.3 kilos. You'll get a few a bit lighter and a few a bit heavier than that, but 1.2 to 1.3 kilos is sort of really common. So yes, a couple hundred grams under, but the balance point is 12 centimeters, which is a really, really common historical balance point for a rapier, and a great deal of other swords for that matter. And as a result, although it's a little bit on the light side, it kind of has the right feel, if you like. It doesn't kind of, it does have the right feel. So there you go. Length, it's about 110 centimeters, which is about 43.5 inches. So for the vast majority of people out there, it's going to be the right length, or the ideal length for something like Capoferro or Fabri or something like that. So the really long rapiers, and they do shorter models as well. But there you go. Length is good. Balance is perfect. Weight slightly under, but I don't think that's such a big deal, particularly with this one, as opposed to the cup hilt, and I'll go on to that in a minute. Right, the hilt itself, very, very typical, straight quillen, rather than sort of S-shape like I've got on mine, but you know, both existed. It's very robust. It's built to the standards that, you know, a lot of production rapiers would be. It's simple and just strong, nice to look at. I'm happy with that all round. And the pommel is the pommel from their dagger. And the reason they've done that is because this guard, because there's so many bars on it, it adds a lot of weight. so they don't need a heavy pommel on this particular model, so they've got a small pommel, and the balance is great for it. Now, grip length is very short, like this. Now I've got a very typical average medium-sized hand, so if you've got a large hand you might find that a little bit small, and you could just ask them to extend the grip slightly, because they make everything to order anyway, so you could just have it made slightly longer if you wanted to. And also, if you wanted to say wear like a red dragon glove in it, I mean, with rapier I only ever wear a leather glove, so that fits perfectly. I like to have a rapier hilt to be as compact as absolutely possible. Look at most historical rapiers and the grips are very short. So for me that's perfect. For most people it'll be perfect, but if you've got very big hands or you want to use a big glove, you're going to have to get that extended just a little bit. Right. The thing people are really going to want to know about is the blade characteristic, because as I said, they've never made rapiers before, and I know even Black Fencer themselves were concerned as to whether they could actually make it work, because it's just so different to their other blades, just because it's so thin. That's the only reason, is that rapiers are very long, very thin, this kind of rapier anyway. And has it worked? Yes, it has. Really successfully, actually. So flexibility, I would say, is similar to a darkwood practice blade, the longer length like the 45, which is nice and flexible for safety. So you've got a nice bit of flex, and most of it is in the tip, which is excellent. Nice amount of flex. It doesn't go particularly rigid on the thrust, like I say a side sword from Black Fencer does. So it flexes really nicely on the thrust. And in terms of your blade engagement work, it flexes on the flats a little bit, as actually a lot of rapiers historically and training ones do, and on the edges doesn't whatsoever. So in terms of how it works blade on blade for single sword work, things like that, it works pretty damn well. Not as good as to say a very rigid rapier like say the baited blades from Darkwood or something like that. So it's more like the practice blades, a little bit of flex in there, but overall very good. And it's nothing like the Hamway whippy sort of 43-inch practical blades. It just doesn't have those problems at all. It's just a small amount of flex like a Darkwood practice blade. The longer ones again, because remember this is 43.5 inch, it is pretty long. Also, although it's a very, very thin blade, the tip actually flares out as opposed to the blade, which has this nice taper into the edges, but yet it flares out into a nice thick tip, which is thicker than any kind of tip that we would normally use for steel rapiers, so that's nice and safe as well. So in terms of sparring, I found it exceptionally good. It's not quite as good as steel on blade engagements, but it's very close. Much closer than, again, using something like the Hamway 43. It's pretty damn close. Most of the time I can forget when I'm sparring that I'm even using a synthetic. It is very good. And the other nice thing is, if you watch the videos where I was using this, is it shows up so well on film, which is wonderful, and also great for judging, if you've got judges actually using something to do in a competition or whatever else. So yeah, shows up well, handles well, it's nice and safe, it hits light, although rapiers tend to, and the thrust, it really does flex nicely. It doesn't take a set, which steel rapiers, they all do. Hit somebody really hard with a really strong thrust quickly, and they'll often take a set in the blade and stay bent, and you have to reshape them, which is why I'm always stamping on blades and reshaping them. They don't do that. They do, however, deform if you leave them in heat, like I left them in the boot of my car when I went on holiday in very hot weather for us. It was a heat wave for us, and yes, it did basically. It was basically bowed like this inside the bag, and it stuck to that shape. But it's easy to reshape. You just put it on a reverse surface and leave it there for a little bit. Bend it back. You can put it back into shape, no problem. So it's kind of quite nice, is that it does hold its form, provided you don't leave it bent. And durability wise, the edges are taken almost nowhere whatsoever. We've used them against some steel as well, steel rapiers, because people were asking about that. Can you use it against steel rapier? Well, yes, you can actually. It works okay. Just bearing in mind that they are a little bit lighter, so you might have a slight advantage if you're going up with somebody against a 1.4 kilo rapier, but that's for something for you to sort out. So overall, my opinion on these are, if you want to train this for something like Capo for Brie, it's an excellent beginner weapon. Also excellent for somebody who wants to go across multiple styles and have a range of swords in their bag. As with a lot of weapon combinations, I would recommend people do buy steel if they can anyway, But as entry level club weapon, if you train multiple styles, so you can't afford to be buying all these steels, it's just an all-round excellent training sword. And particularly with rapiers are so goddamn expensive now that this is great to have. Now, onto the cup hilt. And the reason this is important is because people are far more likely to buy this one than they are the swept hilt, just because it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper. It's something like 87 euros for this one to about 120 or something like that for the swept hilt. That's enough of a difference to push a lot of people towards the cup hilt. And I ordered two because I knew that would happen. I knew loads of my students would want to buy the cup, and therefore I need to try it. Now, I just absolutely despise cup hilts. I really do. I love rapiers of most kinds, but I look at that and it looks ugly. It looks like something that should be in the kitchen and not in a sword fight. Don't like it. But I don't like it because it's a cup hilt. I can appreciate that they are a good design though. Cup hilts are simple to produce, cheap, easy, and effective at stopping cut and thrust. So it is an effective design, and that's something I can discuss in another video. So that's just a personal thing, don't worry about that. Now, how good is it? Well, the blade is identical, so you know what the properties of that are because I've already discussed it. The pommel, they've had to use a heavier pommel because the guard is a lot lighter, because this is a spun ball and the rest of the guard is quite simple. So the guard overall is light, they put a heavier pommel on to make up for that, and this is the side sword pommel. And as a result, this is actually the heavier of the two, which is not what you'd expect, but it's all down to this pommel. And this comes out at 1 kilo and 50 grams. So yeah, is it 60, 70 grams, something like that in it? But because it's all on the pommel, it does bring the balance back. 12 centimeters for the swept hilt, 10 centimeters for this cup. Now 10 centimeters is not an unhistorical, inaccurate point of balance, but 12 would be more typical. And particularly if you want to do something like Capoferro, you really want a bit of blade presence to be able to stringer, dominate their blade. So yeah, this is a little bit lighter in the blade, less blade presence as you would say. So handling wise, I far prefer the swept. Aside from that, it's an excellent sword, and I would have no problem with people buying this over the swept hilt, even though I don't like the way it looks. I can get over that. It's a cheap, solid training sword. The bolt's very, very strong. We've not had any problems with that at all. We have really hit it with side swords and stuff as well. Nice and strong. There's lots of room to get sort of bigger gloves in as well. So with red dragons, that's quite ideal. With a lot of room in there, which you wouldn't normally need red dragons for a rapier fight, but you might want to use rapier against a heavier sword. So yeah, you might want to wear heavier gloves. So in many ways, the cup has a couple of advantages in that regard. What else can I say about it? Not really much, because I've already said everything on the swept hilt. In terms of just how it compares, there is a Denelli basic cup hilt, which is a sort of a good benchmark sort of entry-level training sword, and you can see it matches fairly well, aside from the big pommel, which was necessary, and size-wise, it's slightly longer, and the weight's pretty much identical. Balance is close as well. The Denelli is slightly further forwards. So overall then, it's really hard to say much bad about these rapiers, is that I would like them to be slightly heavier, and I'd like the cup hilt to balance slightly further forward. But it's quite a modest detail, and I don't think it's too much to worry about. Is as an entry-level rapier, or as I said, some kind of club weapon, whatever else, or an extra weapon you want to have, particularly the swept hilt, but even the cup hilt as well, are excellent training swords. And loads of people in the club have now been using them. We've used them in a range of scenarios, different opponents, different combinations, against other Black Fencer swords as well. They stand up really well to sabres and side swords and all that kind of thing. So yeah, really, really very good. And I will be recommending them. I am recommending them now. If it's something you're interested in, I'll definitely recommend them. But the beauty of it is that more so than ever before, we now have a cheap entry-level option for rapier, because that has held us back, our club and a lot of others, for a long time now, is that somebody wants to get into rapier and it's kind of, hundreds of pounds or dollars just flying out on your, entry-level sword. Whereas, you can get these, or particularly for me, I want to be able to carry these for beginners to use, rather than smash up my, expensive steels. That's perfect as well. So, yeah, really, really good. Very impressed. It's worked really, really well. And I suspect if you wanted to have a bit more weight in the blade, I'm sure they'd probably make it that way for you. So Black Fence are always keen to make mods, not necessarily keen, but they're happy to. So yeah, there you go, review of the Black Fence rapiers. Really, really good, very impressed, really holding up well. And on that note, in terms of durability, I was concerned what the durability would be like when you have something quite this thin in plastic. So far, rock solid, like everything else Black Fence that we've had. And in that regard, it can make them even cheaper than running steel rapiers, because anybody that has steel rapiers will know that you burn through blades. I probably break a blade maybe every 2 or 3 years. And I'm not doing rapier all the time because I do sabre and other things as well. So back when I was doing rapier every single week, or twice a week, even 3 times a week, I was breaking more blades still. Whereas these, I think they're going to be much more durable. I know they're going to be much more durable than all the steel blades that are out there for rapier. So yeah, there we go. Excellent glue-in review. They didn't pay me for it. I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.